Welcome to the Lessons from Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Brian Beckcom. My next guest is U.S. Congressman Will Hurd. Will is originally from San Antonio. Will went to Texas A&M University, where he majored in computer science and took a minor in international relations. He was also the student body president at Texas A&M. After he graduated, Will joined the C.I.A., where he worked undercover in Pakistan, among other places, as an undercover C.I.A. agent. After getting out of the C.I.A., Will ran for U.S. Congress. In the podcast, Will and I talk about the politics of the future, what it was like being an undercover agent in the CIA, how he got in the CIA, his thoughts on China, Hong Kong, the pandemic, race relations, artificial intelligence, the future of technology, who our adversaries are and what we should do about it, and other things. Will is the kind of politician that we really need in this country. Will is a leader, and he is a problem solver. And he's solving problems that are important and problems that we really need to pay attention to in the future, including China, Russia, and technology and where that's taking us. This was a great interview. Will gave me an hour of his time, and he's a super busy guy, super smart guy, wonderful patriot, and just a great person in general. And now I give you Congressman Will Hurd. Hey, everybody. Brian Beckcom here, and I have got U.S. Congressman Will Hurd. Congressman Hurd, how are you doing today?
Counselor, I'm doing fantastic. And you better not be doing it. You better call me Will through the rest of this.
I feel a little bad about that.
We've known each other too long.
I know. I've been thinking about that for the past couple of days. Congressman, Representative, Will. What's the appropriate thing? But well, thank you for saying that, Will. Before we get started, I just wanted to tell you how much I look up to you. I mean, you've served our country both as a CIA officer and as a representative, and I just think you're a great American, and so I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Before we get started, how you doing, man?
Look, we live in crazy times. I'm actually in Washington, D.C. as we speak. I'm on the Appropriations Committee, and so we're trying to fund the government. And it's being in Texas, splitting time between Texas and D.C. It's just it's wild times. I think 2020 is definitely going to go in the record books, and decades from now, I think there's going to be, people, anybody who was around at this time, they're going to be like, tell us more about what happened in 2020. It's just so many interesting things happening.
Yeah, we're living through history, and this idea of the end of history, I think 2020 kind of proves that we're not there yet. But so how's the family doing? Everybody doing okay?
Yeah, everybody's fine. My folks, my dad's 87, my mom's 76. And they're healthy. And, my brother and sister also live in San Antonio. So we're able to get them provisions and take them supplies. And my dad always jokes. He's like, he has no problem staying at home because he always says the best times in his life is when he's been by himself. So he's, they're good. Everybody's healthy. And, my brother has young kids, and so, what's going to happen with school? These are all questions that they're grappling with.
Is that the brother who's, because I think you have a nephew who is a quarterback at Baylor University. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. We, he toured A&M as well, but he decided on Baylor, and so but that's the son of my sister.
Your sister. Okay. That's your sister's son.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, Will, a lot of people know who you are. You're a national figure for good reason, I think. But for the people that don't know who you are, do you mind telling us a little bit about where you come from, where you went to school, a little bit about your work history before you became a congressman?
Sure. I grew up, born and raised in San Antonio, and I tell the story. So my father's Black, my mother's white. And they met in L.A. in 1970 and got married and moved to San Antonio, Texas in 1971. And the house they live in now, they lived there for all of my life, well over 43 years. was the only house in San Antonio that would sell to, one of the few neighborhoods that would sell to an interracial couple, right?
Yeah.
And so even in 1971, it wasn't in vogue to be an interracial couple. And I'm the baby of three, grew up, went to public schools all through San Antonio, and then Texas A&M. And my sophomore year in high school, I had a internship at Southwest Research Institute in San Antonio, the largest private research entity in the United States of America. And I worked for this amazing female engineer who was a robotics expert. She got me interested in technology and computer science. And she was graduated from Stanford. So I was like, I'm going to go to Stanford. and so I applied, got accepted, was going to go, even got a scholarship. And then I had a counselor from my high school who was a big Aggie, and he said, kept hounding me to go to A&M's campus. And I said, if I go, will you leave me alone? And he said, sure. So I called some buddies that I had played basketball with in my high school and stayed with them 1 week and fell in love with A&M and decided to go to A&M over Stanford and study computer science. But my freshman year, I'm in the engineering building, the old Zachary building, and I see a sign that says take 2 journalism classes in Mexico City for $425. And I had $450 in my bank account. And so I went to Mexico, fell in love being in another culture, seeing things I'd only read about in books. And I thought it was amazing. And so I added international studies as my minor. In the first class I took in international studies, I had this guest lecturer who was this former CIA tough guy, Cold Warrior, tell these amazing stories. And that began my interest in the CIA. And when I graduated from A&M, I went into the agency. And so I was a case officer. So I was a dude in the back alleys at 4:00 in the morning, recruiting spies and stealing secrets. It was the best job on the planet. Did 2 years in DC at what I used to call the super secret CIA training facility called the Farm. Now it's on Google Maps. I did 2 years in India, 2 years in Pakistan, 2 years in New York City doing interagency work, and then 1.5 years in Afghanistan, where I managed all of our undercover operations. And in addition to collecting intelligence, I had to brief members of Congress, and I was pretty shocked by the caliber of our elected officials. And my mama said, you're either part of the problem, part of the solution. And so I left a job I was good at and moved to my hometown of San Antonio to run for Congress. And I lost my first election by 700 votes. I'm glad I don't tell that story anymore. I helped start a cybersecurity company and then ran successfully. And so I've been doing that now for almost 6 years.
Nice. Awesome. Well, you said a lot of things there, and I want to kind of flag a couple of those. Mm-hmm. You were the student body president at A&M, and then you worked in the C.I.A. after college. You were a computer science major and I was a computer science major too. Yep. I got a degree. Actually, I was a general studies major because when I was at A&M at first, I was playing on the basketball team, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I liked computers. And I tell people, I ended up being a lawyer because I spent 4 years behind a computer screen, and I didn't want to spend my whole life behind a computer screen. And now 20 years later, I spend most of my time behind a computer screen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But you said a lot of things there. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Will, is you've always, since I've known you and before, you've always had this drive, this passion, this leadership ability. I mean, from the moment I knew you, and from a very young age as well. And so where do you think that drive or passion or purpose or whatever you want to label it, where does that come from for you?
I appreciate the question and the sentiment of the question. And I asked my parents. So I'm a mama's boy, right? Like I had a speech impediment until late in middle school, early high school. My mother was the only person that could understand me. And I always ask her, I'm like, what do you think this was? And part of it, I think it's kind of like this engineering mindset. Even as a kid, I liked building things. I liked solving problems. And so I've accepted that I when I see a problem, I literally can't, and I think I could fix it. I literally can't not try to fix it. And I've been that way my entire life. And I've actually stopped trying to figure out why. It's just, when you're hungry, what do? You eat.
Yeah.
Right. And this is just, if I see a problem and I think I could fix it, I got to try. I got to try to fix it, right? And on the flip side of that, I think the Dalai Lama said, and I'm going to butcher this a little bit, if you have control of a situation, don't worry, because you're going to be able to do something about it. But if you don't have control of the situation, don't worry, because there's nothing you can do about it, right?
Yeah, that's like the serenity prayer, I think, similar to the serenity prayer, right?
Sure. And so I think that's what it is. And I've also learned that when you're able to solve, when you prove that you can solve problems, and the feeling of solving a problem, you're like, oh man, that's awesome. And then you continue to solve problems, and then you're not afraid to try to tackle bigger problems. And there's a cumulative effect. And and I've been lucky that I've had people at every level of my life suggest me to do things, and I've tried it and I've enjoyed it and I've learned from it, right? And so I think that's what it starts. I like solving problems.
Well, that's awesome. And one of the things you said there, success begets success. The more success you have, the more encouragement you get, and the more you do it. Well, I remember when I was very young, my mother, who died when I was 10, we were in a car and she was with her sister and I was in the back seat. I couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. And she said, "Hey, Brian, add the numbers 1 through 10 together as quickly as you can." And for some reason, my mind was able to go 1 plus 9, 2 plus 8, 7 plus 3, 6 plus 4, 5, 10, 55. And my mom was like, "Oh my God, my son is brilliant." But it really encouraged me. I took a liking to math. And so that's kind of why I got into computer science. And you're right. The way it teaches you how to think, the way it teaches you how to solve problems, is, I think, it's kind of a meta skill. It's a skill that you can port with you anywhere you go. And it's something that'll be with you your entire life. Well, before we
100%. And I'll add my, the other thing, my mom, man, she wouldn't let me slip, right? If I had a 96 on the report card and the next 6 weeks it was a 94, she was on my tail, right? I remember the first time I ever got a B, right? I'm on the bus crying because I'm gonna go home because my mom was gonna be outside her mind, right? And so she put very high expectations, and having that, at a young age. And again, if you can do the small things well, then you're gonna be able to do big things well. If you can't do the small things, you can't do the big things. And so it's iterative.
Well, let's before we talk, there's a number of issues that I think you're kind of an expert in, that you have a very big interest in. China, Russia. I want to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence, maybe a little bit about what's going on in Hong Kong right now. But before we talk about that, I've been, because I don't know the answer to this, because you and I have never talked about it. And I think there's a lot of people that may be listening who are interested in joining the CIA or the FBI or something like that. So how was it that, do you just fill out an application and apply, or you recruited? If somebody's interested in joining the CIA, how would they go about doing that?
It literally starts with an application and an interview process, right?
Nice.
It truly is a meritocracy. And so there's certain things, like you have to have a certain GPA. You have to have an undergraduate degree. Usually they like folks that have a graduate degree or a certain amount of experience beyond undergrad. I was rare as an undergraduate going straight in the agency. Literally only a handful of folks that do that. And usually they want someone that has a language skill or experience overseas. And so what I tell students that are in undergrad, get a language, and then go work in that language, or at a minimum study in that language 1 semester, so that you can show that you have proficiency and are able to work in a culture, in a unique culture. That's ultimately what your job is when you're in the CIA. There's also a great book by a friend, a boss, a mentor, and then a business partner later in life. His name is Hank Crumpton, and it's called The Art of Intelligence. And it's a great book. is kind of like a primer on what the Directorate of Operations, or what's now called the National Clandestine Service. And to be able, for me, I knew I wanted to serve my country, but I also have problems following rules, right? So kind of like the military was probably not going to be a great track for me.
Yeah.
And so, but to go to exotic places and do crazy things, that was perfect. And it literally the best job on the planet. I'd still be doing it if I didn't think, I thought I could help the intelligence community in a different way.
Yeah.
And by running for office. And so had I not thought that, I would have stayed in, because it was the best job on the planet.
And you were, so it wasn't like somebody just came up to you in a restaurant and like tapped you on the shoulder and said, "Hey, we're recruiting you."
So there was a recruiter at A&M, and Jim Olson's his name. He's pretty well known, and he was that guest lecturer I was talking about. And literally after I heard him lecture, the next day I went and knocked on his door, and I was like, "Tell me more." And that began a friendship and a relationship, and having someone that can kind of hold your hand through that process is one of the reasons why I was successful. Also at the time, Dr. Bob Gates was the interim head of the Bush School. This was before he went on to be Secretary of Defense. And having him, having had run the CIA as well, was a great mentor also. But in the end, it is a application and an interview process and all these crazy tests, that you can't prepare for. And so it was a great gig. I recommend it to everyone.
That's awesome. And so, and you actually, you spent time, there's probably some things that maybe you still can't talk about, but you spent time undercover in the Middle East, and you said something about learning a language. I was looking on your Wikipedia page. You're fluent in Urdu, is that right?
I've tried to change that. I was never fluent in Urdu. I had survival Urdu. Okay.
Yeah.
I knew enough. I could get by. And when I grew out my beard and wore a shower kameez, kind of local garb, my Urdu was good enough to get the locals discount in the bazaar, right?
Nice.
And so it was good enough to get by, but I was not fluent. I'm not. I remember a few phrases now.
Your Urdu is probably like my Spanish. I can get by, but that's about it. Right. So tell us what you can tell us about, because I know there's going to be a lot of people that are really interested in what it's like to be undercover in a foreign country. And so first of all, give us the time frame, if you can, in which you're over there, and then kind of tell us as much as you can about what it's like. I mean, is it like what you see in the movies? Is it totally different from that? Is it like that sometimes? Just tell us what you can tell us about that experience.
Sure. So I left San Antonio, Texas in my Toyota 4Runner the day of the USS Cole bombing. So the USS Cole was a Navy destroyer that was bombed by Al-Qaeda in the Gulf of Aden off the coast of the country of Yemen. And then my career ended. That was October of 2000. And then I left the agency in August of 2009. And that was literally a couple of months before the base in Coast was bombed, where it was probably the deadliest attack on the CIA in our history. And so those were the bookends of my tour, or my time in the agency. And I would say a really great movie on the CIA is the movie with Ben Affleck, Argo.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Argo is a great, and that's a very unique case. That's actually a case that is taught in CIA 101, which is literally a class like everybody takes, a couple of weeks course to learn about and it's called CIA 101. I don't think I'm revealing secrets with that. And that's an excellent book. And the movie Zero Dark 30 is pretty close. It's an amalgamation of a lot of different characters. About some of the work, but part of, so the way the National Clandestine Service, the folks like me and the guys and gals like me that were to collect intelligence, we are the collectors of last resort. So if you can't get a piece of information any other way, through diplomacy through signals intelligence, taking something out of the sky, through imagery intelligence. Then you go to the CIA, because human intelligence, humans, is the hardest and the most expensive way of collecting intelligence. And part of the job is you have people that are sharing intelligence with you, and it's protecting them. And my number one job is to make sure a lot of movies get this part wrong. My most important job was to protect the life of the individual that's sharing information with me and that individual's family. And a lot of these movies try to act like those relationships are throwaway. No, that is, I would literally, I may have had assets that could get a piece of information, but them getting it was going to put them in such harm that it would potentially get them, they'd get identified and killed. And so you protect those folks. And then if you say, okay, there's a unit within a military that has some information that we need, how do you get access to someone in that unit, right? And so you have no leads, you have no reason, and then you try to figure out how you make that happen. And so that's ultimately what the job is. So, you have a big issue, like what is the plans and intentions of the Haqqani network in Afghanistan? And then our job from a strategic intelligence point is to try to figure out what they're going to do. And then you have the military intelligence, which like what's happening over that hill, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so that's kind of the difference between the strategic and the tactical. And then if there's something impacting the United States of America, FBI gets involved, but oftentimes there's joint cases between the CIA and the FBI. So that's what it's like. And living undercover. So I was most of the time in true name, right? I worked for the State Department, and I actually did a lot of work for the State Department. But then there was times that I was traveling in alias, wasn't connected to the government. And that's a little trickier, especially when you run into people that know you in true name, but you might be an alias. And so to get you out of that situation, and that happened to me a few times.
When you first started talking about how your first job is to protect your sources and their family, kind of the first thought that came to my mind is, why would we care? I mean, what's the point? Like, why would you care? And it seems to me like maybe one reason that that's so important is because if you want people to help the United States, they have to know that you will do whatever you can to protect them and their family as an initial matter. Is that kind of where that comes from?
100%. And so you always have this debate between intelligence versus action, right? You collect information oftentimes to do something about it. And there's always a tension. But you also have to realize that when you act on the information, you could burn that source. You could put that source in trouble and no longer have access to that information. So that's why policymakers are the ones that ultimately make that decision. And you also, so the way you are able to get people to cooperate is because they have a motivation to work with the United States government. Usually there's a problem with their country or their regime, and they want to make sure that their society is free and fair and open, and they recognize that helping the U.S. government have a best understanding of a situation is the most important. So to get to a point where someone's willing to share information that could ultimately get them killed, there has to be trust. And that trust is built on the fact that I'm going to be able to keep you safe and protect you and your family if something were to happen.
Nice. Well, and the other thing I think people may not realize, and I'm sure you've got plenty of friends in the military. I got plenty of friends in the military since I was in the Corps of Cadets and my dad and granddad, et cetera. But I've got a friend who was a United States Marine Corps officer who was in Afghanistan very, very shortly after 9/11, and the CIA was already there. Like he said, they landed and CIA officers came up to them on horseback. So truly the point of the spear, the tip of the spear.
When you talk to Afghans about the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, they're like, what invasion? because
Yeah.
when after September 11th happened, we had a group go in, we had relationships, and this is why allies matter, right?
Sure.
You got to maintain relationships, because when something bad happens, you got to have something that you can actually leverage and work with. And by the time Kandahar fell, Kandahar was a city in southern Afghanistan, which was really like the capital of the Taliban. That fell in late December of 2001. By that point, there were only 400 Americans on the ground in Afghanistan, 100 CIA officers, 300 U.S. Special Forces. Now, the greatest Air Force the world had ever seen.
For
but
sure.
We killed 75% of Al Qaeda leadership and pushed all the Taliban out of the entire country. And we did that with only 400 Americans working with our Afghan allies, right? That was why that operation was so successful, because the footprint was incredibly low, and we did it with our partners.
That is unbelievable, and I think it is a really, really good lesson for us, especially nowadays, and how important it is to have allies, whether they can do anything for you immediately or not. Having somebody to rely on when you're in those situations is really important. Well, Will, so in my view, and I think a lot of people's view, frankly, you're the kind of politician that I wish we had more of in this country. Like you are, and what I mean by that is, for some reason, and I don't know how you do this, you always have seemed, to me at least, really focused on hard problems and problems that are 10 years down the road, 5, 10, 20 years down the road, rather than problems that we've been fighting about for 30 years, some of which may be important, but some of which really probably aren't that important. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to kind of bounce around a little bit on
let's do it.
Some of your thoughts on some various issues. And so I think the first thing, if it's okay, the first thing I want to talk about is Hong Kong. And one of the reasons for that is because I'm about 3/4 of the way through rereading 1984. And man, I got to tell you what, it's frightening to read 1984 and then to read what's going on in Hong Kong vis-a-vis China. So tell us, if you don't mind, kind of lay out a little bit for the listeners who don't pay attention to that sort of thing. What is going on right now in Hong Kong as it relates to China?
So we got to go back to 1996, I believe it was, where Hong Kong was a protectorate of the United Kingdom. And so at that point, the UK was kind of getting out of the out of having all these far-flung protectorates, and they, in essence, said, we're going to give Hong Kong back to China with some preconditions, that Hong Kong had to be allowed to operate as an independent entity for, I want to say, 75 years. There was a time horizon, right? We still have about 35 years on that clock, right? And so this was this whole notion of two entities, one China policy, two entities. I'm butchering the name, but Hong Kong was supposed to be an independent entity, but it was going to be a city of China in 35 years. So what the Chinese have done, the Chinese Communist Party has done, has basically violated that international agreement that they made not only with the United Kingdom, but with the broader United Nations. And they have, in essence, taken over Hong Kong. Hong Kong was free. Hong Kong was a financial center of Asia, not just Asia, but the rest of the world. And now the Chinese government has come in and banning books that talk about democracy and are trying to crush this, the will and the backs of these folks. Now, this is a premonition of what they're going to try to do with Taiwan. Now, Taiwan, we recognize Taiwan as a separate country. The Chinese believe that Taiwan is also part of their country. So for the Chinese, they were going to get Hong Kong. And part of it was if they waited 35 years, it was going to come their way. But they saw the opportunity that coronavirus is presenting. They saw the Europe and the tension, the transatlantic tensions between the United States and our EU allies, and they pushed hard, and they've been successful in basically taking over Hong Kong. You had protesters in Hong Kong that was trying to fight this overreach, singing the national anthem, saying, "America, we need your help," right? Yeah. They were marching on our embassy, waving our flag, saying, this is an example of how we have to make sure democracy continues. And democracy is dying right now in Hong Kong. And it is unfortunate. And then this is going to be an example of the playbook the Chinese are going to use when they try to take over Taiwan.
Yeah, and so the most recent thing I read, Will, was that they have passed a law of some sort that you can get arrested by the Chinese authorities for criticizing what's going on in Hong Kong. I haven't read all the details of that, but as I read through 1984, I mean, the parallels are just absolutely stunning. I mean, the idea of, quote, Big Brother, which would be China in this case, in 1984 is, we're going to get rid of the past. We're going to get rid of books. We're going to change the language. So there's not even any concept of democracy anymore. And so if there's not even a word for that, then consciously people don't even think about that. And I worry a lot, Will, that Hong Kong is going down that direction so fast that it may be too late to do anything about it.
Absolutely. Or the only way that you're going to be able to stop it is with force. And then that becomes a broader question of when do you use force in that kind of situation? And if we're going to be the ones using force, is the American public prepared for that? And the question is going to be why? Yeah. And you talk about the laws. So everybody was talking about this national security law that the Hong Kong parliament ultimately passed. And it was implemented. But once that happened, they passed a number of successive pieces of, in essence, our equivalent of an executive order to follow up on the banning of the books and all these kinds of things. So this is not going to stop. And again, so here's the other thing I've learned over my years. If there is not a consequence for negative behavior, that negative behavior will continue. And so what is the rest of the world going to do to the Chinese in response to this? Is it sanctions, right? Like what are all the steps that we can be doing to show, because this is in essence a takeover, right? Like I could equate what the Chinese have done in Hong Kong to what the Russians have done in the Donbass region of the Ukraine or Crimea, or what they've tried to do in south of Ossetia in Georgia, right? Like this is the Russians have done this, and this is, I think the Chinese saw that playbook. They're also a little more sophisticated on this, and then now they have the technological superiority to do even crazier things than what we saw in 1984. And so this is a broader issue, because this authoritarian activity, this really is a question about authoritarianism versus democracy. Yeah. And if we don't stand up for democracy when it gets attacked, then who will?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's not free. It doesn't happen automatically. And I would even argue, Will, historically, that democracy is generally the exception, not the rule. I mean, it's historically it's been kings and queens and people like that, and so you have to fight for it. Well, what is the end game for China in your opinion? Like, what are they trying to accomplish through Hong Kong and Taiwan? Because one of the things that we see, like for instance, Daryl Morey, the Houston Rockets GM, had a very anodyne criticism of China, and boy, the reaction from China would just seem completely and totally over the top. And then, LeBron James, who who I admire a lot as a former basketball player and as a human being. I admire him as a human being. Even LeBron James backed down from China a little bit. And so what is it that China is attempting to accomplish, and why is it that it's so difficult to stand against what they're trying to do?
So the Chinese are very clear in what they're trying to do. By 2049, they're trying to surpass the United States of America as the sole superpower in the world. Now, this is not my assessment. This is not me collecting intelligence on the Chinese. This is literally what the Chinese have said themselves. Why does 2049 matter? That matters because that will be when they celebrate 100 years of communist rule in mainland China. And the way they believe they're going to do this is by perfecting and becoming the global leader in 10, 12 areas of technology and being able to project power. A part of that is this broader, they feel like they have to right a number of wrongs, right? In the Middle East, this was the version of a blood feud. A blood feud, though, in the Middle East goes out in someone's lifetime. The Chinese are going to say, hey, we got screwed by Taiwan and Hong Kong and Macau and some of these places, and we're going to go take that back to right those wrongs, and we can say we did this and unified, in essence, the Middle Kingdom, right? Yeah. So there is a cultural piece to solidifying that, but then their effort is to make sure that they become leaders in things like artificial intelligence, 5G, quantum computing, space, advanced optics. And why, everybody's talking about Huawei. And why does this matter? The global tech titans are American companies because America had the best 4G network. And we have all those things because they were able to put everything on these things, right? Yeah. Now, the next $1 trillion companies are going to be companies that leverage 5G infrastructure. Why does 5G matter? It's going to be awesome to download a 4K movie on my phone in 3 seconds. Okay, that's great. Yeah. And that means being able to push data quickly to a device. But the real value of 5G is a thing called latency. And latency, as you know, I do something on my phone, I make a command on my phone, this goes to the cloud, and then you get a response back. Yeah. The time it takes for that handshake to happen is going to, in 5G, is going to take 10 nanoseconds. Why does 10 nanoseconds matter? We make decisions in 8 nanoseconds. So now you're going to have the entire power of the internet in real time. Yeah. What is that going to be able to allow us to do? I don't know. I have some ideas, right? The Chinese know this. So they said, hey, whoever masters 5G is going to master all these other entities. And then when you have the infrastructure, the 5G infrastructure, this is when artificial intelligence becomes interesting, right? And so then what do you need in artificial intelligence? You need data to train the algorithms. The Chinese don't care about privacy. They don't care about civil liberties. So they have as much data as they want. Guess what? Why did the OPM hack happen from a number of years ago? And the fact that people still know what OPM is because the Chinese stole 24 million records of American working for the government. Yeah. Now, how many of those, had some reason to be in China? And that's why they took that kind of information. So now you have the Chinese go into Hong Kong, a financial center in the world, right? If that data wasn't moved, now the Chinese have access to all that data, right? And so these are some of the things that they're trying to do, and so ultimately, all of these efforts are steps, and this is to answer your original question. Sorry, I went along a little long. All of these were the steps in order to be the world superpower in what, 20, you're good with math, and how many, 29 years?
29 years. Yeah, not long at all. And you said a lot there, Will, but one of the things you said at the very beginning, which I think is really, really important for people not only to understand, but also to do, is this is not us guessing. This is China saying exactly what it is they want to do. It's kind of like with ISIS. If you wanted to know what ISIS's goals
Yeah.
were, you could read them because they had a magazine that they published. I mean,
Right.
and a list of goals. And so it's important, I think, that not only do we know what their goals are, but that we take what they're saying seriously. I mean, this is actually what they want to do. And, you brought up something about some of the technology stuff, and we could have a whole nother 2 podcasts about the technology stuff. But, for instance, I've been talking to my kids about TikTok, and, there's some news out right now that President Trump is thinking about banning TikTok. And I've been telling my kids, man, you got to be super, super careful, because that is essentially Chinese spyware. And anything you do on that is not private. My 14-year-old boy came up to me last night and he said, "Hey, Dad, I deleted all my posts on TikTok and stopped following everybody. But this stuff is real. And, there's a lot of things coming down the pike in technology, like you're talking about artificial intelligence, and we can have a discussion about what intelligence is or isn't. But at the very least, nowadays, most artificial intelligence involves what's called deep learning, which basically is just brute force, gathering as much data as you can, feeding it into the algorithm, and then using neural networks to go from there. But, let me ask you this question. Well, just because you mentioned 5G and how important 5G is. And, I've been reading some things on various social media sites about 5G causing brain cancer or other sorts of weird things. Is that, what are your thoughts on that? Because to me, it sounds like that is something that may actually be coming from some of our adversaries.
Whether it's coming from some of the adversaries or not, I don't know the answer. But it's just all the reviews and environmental impact statements. This stuff has been reviewed, and it doesn't have a side effect. There was this rumor that 5G was causing COVID, and there was somebody that put some maps. Right, 5G is a safe, usable technology, and it's going to be the future. And the problem is there's a first mover advantage. And,
sure.
And not only do you need the infrastructure, because wherever the infrastructure is built, that is where all the entrepreneurs and people that are building things to work on 5G are going to go to test their systems. Yep. So making sure that, there's little problems, like some cities and counties were trying to nickel and dime companies, because 5G requires more antennas. Yeah. It's because of the wavelength at which they're operating. And cities were trying to use this as an ATM, and charging outrageous fees in order to put this up, which was impacting the services that constituents would be able to take advantage of. And there was even a court case or a piece of legislation moving through the state house in Texas on this topic. But yeah, it's such a foundational technology for so many things of the future. It's coming, and we're in a race. And in my opinion, we're losing that race. We're behind.
Mine too.
We can catch up, but it's going to take a Herculean effort to do it.
And so for the people that aren't really involved in these issues, the idea of the first mover advantage basically says whoever's there first is going to have a huge advantage. And with AI and computing, I think there's like jet fuel poured on that, because there's this idea of the singularity. There's this idea that once for instance, once a machine was able to beat a human in chess, they will always be able to beat a human in chess for the rest of history. It's the same thing with things like self-driving cars. Once you reach a certain point, like a machine that can build a machine, you have such a massive advantage over everybody else that it's really, really important not to get too far behind. Well, that's really, really good stuff, Will. And I know I don't have you for a whole bunch of time today, but there are a couple other issues, if it's okay, that I really want to hear from you about, because I know people listening are going to want to hear from somebody like you about this. I want to talk a little bit about the protests, and also a little bit about your thoughts on the pandemic and kind of what we're looking at over the next 6, 8, 12 months. So but let's talk about the protests first. You were actually at a protest in Houston. I saw you on the news. Black Lives Matter protest, which you know, it was a protest for racial justice, basically. But what are your thoughts right now? Because what I'm seeing, Will, is a lot of symbolic behavior, a lot of symbolic stuff, but I'm not really seeing, you know, real substantive change. And I think most of the protesters would prefer substantive change over symbolic change. So what are your thoughts on the protests right now?
So I would agree with your substantive change rather than symbolic is what's necessary. And you also, there's different kinds of protests, right? Like I would say what happened in Houston 45 days ago or so was a march, because it was a march in solidarity with George Floyd's family. George Floyd was born in Houston, and the 60,000 people that were there were polite. They were chanting, you know, they weren't saying things nasty. Police was there holding, you know, handing water to people. At the beginning, all 60,000 people, you know, prayed together, said amen together, right? And then everybody walked and then left, right? But some folks have been taking advantage of these peaceful protests to try to create general havoc and anarchy, right?
Yeah.
And so it's okay. Everybody who saw the video and audio of George Floyd being murdered was horrified, right? And it's okay to be outraged by that and say a Black man should not die in police custody. It's happened too many times. But you can also be upset by criminals taking advantage of peaceful protests to loot, kill cops, try to kill cops, those kinds of things. It's okay to have, you can do both. And unfortunately, I think people are trying to act like this is a binary choice. No, most people, Americans agree, don't let this happen to people in police custody and follow the law at the same time, and let's see some change. Now, frustrating thing for me, trying to negotiate this up here in Washington, D.C., and talking to all the players on both sides of the political aisle, everybody agreed on the 2 or 3 things that really would affect change. But in the end, politics got in the way, and we're not going to pass something that could have been signed into law. Now, the president did do an executive order that is going to say training, federal dollars is going to only go if you're following the best in class kind of training. And I always use mental health as an example. 1 out of 10 police stops involves interacting with someone with a mental health issue. Yet the average police department only takes 8 hours of training on how to deal with mental health. My hometown, San Antonio, where I live, the San Antonio Police Department does 40 hours of training on mental health, right?
Nice.
So let's make sure that we know what best practices look. We know what best practices are from great law enforcement officers. Let's make sure those things are happening, you know, at all police departments. And so some of that is going to be able to happen.
Can I ask you this question, Will? Because this is something I've thought long time about. I worry sometimes that we are, you know, in Vietnam, for instance, my dad flew 200 combat missions over Vietnam, and it was pretty clear about 2 years before the war that we were not going to win that war. Mm-hmm. The war on drugs is the same way. And I worry that we are sending good police officers into a war that we're never going to win. And so I wonder if part of the solution might be to rethink the way we look at the war on drugs, because it seems to me like a lot of the police interactions with not just minority communities, but all communities has to do with the drug issue. And I also think that this drug issue has had effects on Mexico that we really wish didn't have. So do you have any thoughts on where that piece might fit into the picture?
Sure. Look, one of the big issues was about, you know, not being able to do no-knock warrants when it comes to drug possession cases, right? Yeah. Because this is Breonna Taylor in Kentucky. There was a no-knock warrant put in, and the boyfriend thought that they were being robbed and reacted. And then also how do you handle the criminalization of some of these cases? This is something you know a little bit better about. So you're not having as many people in our systems. But look, there's an addiction problem, right? So you got to address that piece, right? Then you also have to address it's my friends in Mexico always say it's the drugs and the guns that are coming from the United States that are fueling the narcotraficantes in Mexico.
Exactly.
And I think I actually think we should be using more intelligence with our Mexican partners and with partners throughout Central America to address the supply side issue. My experience and I know how to dismantle networks, and so I talk about supply side issues. The demand side has a big piece as well. And so how do you do that? How do you address those kinds of issues? That's a broader conversation. But for me, there are more things we can be smarter on how we address the dealing with the producers of this issue.
One of the things that I would do on this issue is I would say, what's the goal? Where are we trying to get to? Are we trying to get to a point where nobody ever does the drugs that we decide to tag as illegal, that everybody just stops at? I don't think that's realistic. Is the goal to get the problem under control? Well, what would that mean? Like where are we ultimately trying to get with this? Well, let's talk a little bit about now the pandemic, the coronavirus. Where do you see us? It's now July, beginning of July 7th, 2020. Where do you see this in 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, 12 months? What's the end result?
Let's start with the end and work back. Most of the conversations I've heard on folks working on a vaccine, and the people that are working on the vaccine are confident in their results, that they're also working on ways to distribute the vaccine. Usually what happens, a company will develop the vaccine and then worry about distribution. But it's about 5 US companies are doing that concurrently. And so most of the projections that I've heard is that by Q2 of next year is when we'll start seeing a vaccine potentially as early as into Q1, and then the distribution and widely accepted use of the vaccine by Q2. So we're more than 6 months away, and going to have to continue to deal with this. And this is always going to be in the background. We know what we need to do. Aggressive testing, right? The problem is, when a system is stressed, everybody at the beginning before the stress says, oh, this is how it works. This is only how much time it takes. But when the system actually gets stressed, you realize that it shouldn't take 10 days to get a response from a COVID-19 test. We should be getting that immediately. So you have to have aggressive testing. And then, and part of aggressive testing means a response to that test quickly. So then you can quarantine and separate that individual and do the contact tracing to do that. We should be using technology to do contact tracing rather than, basically people calling folks on their phone book and remembering where they were.
Where were you? Who'd you talk to? I don't even remember what I ate for breakfast yesterday. I don't know how you can remember that. Yeah.
Exactly. And so these are the systems that need to be in place. And as we start talking about schools getting back to work, everybody wants to see schools open, right?
For sure.
Parents
Especially
want to make
parents.
sure that, absolutely. But, right now today, I can say, there's 300 kids under the age of 12 in just El Paso that have COVID-19. And I think in San Antonio, it's about 1,900 kids under the age of 19 that actually have it. And so what happens, and how would that spread in this environment? And can we make sure schools have PPE, that they have aggressive testing, and that we ensure that population is taken care of? And so this is going to be hard and it also requires individuals to have the discipline and the tenacity. We all want to increase our social contacts, right?
For sure.
We want to go hang out with our friends. And the way this is being transmitted is not because you got it at the grocery store. It's because you're hanging out with people that you haven't hung out with in a while, and that's how it's being spread. And so again in San Antonio, this is doubling like all elements, infections, the number of people having to go to the hospital bed use and deaths is doubling about every 6 or 7 days.
And that's one of the things, as somebody with some math chops like you and a little math experience with me, it's very hard for people to really wrap their head around the concept of exponential growth, like how quickly exponential growth happens. And, you said something earlier about binary thinking, Will, and I think that was a great comment. The coronavirus is not, it's either bad or it's not bad. It's not a binary thing. It's something where I think if we're smart about it, we can have the economy open, we can have some schools, but there's, like you said, you're gonna have to take some steps to make sure you protect yourself. I mean, I'm constantly reminded of the bombing of London during World War II, where the Germans were bombing London basically on a daily basis. The British didn't just quit. I mean, they kept going about their business, but they had to take precautions. And, to me, it's kind of the same thing here. Well, real quick, Will, because I know you're a super busy guy, you're running out of time, but give us a couple of your thoughts on, because I know Russia is a big part of interest for you, something you're very interested in. Give us your thoughts on Russia right now, some of the idea behind maybe some of the interferences that they've had with some of our electoral system, with the social media, which I worry about a lot, with the manipulation of social media and the psychology behind social media. Give us your thoughts on what Russia is trying to accomplish and how we respond to that.
So we got to think Russia is a regional thug, not a global superpower, right? But they are a regional thug that's able to project power and in different areas depending on what day of the week it is. And their end goal, and Vladimir Putin's end goal, is to reestablish the territorial integrity of the USSR. And what is getting in his way? A little thing called NATO, right? Yeah. And who's important? Who backs NATO? The United States of America. Yeah. And so if Vladimir Putin is able to erode trust in institutions, erode trust in NATO, erode trust in America's support to our transatlantic partnerships, erode trust in the media, erode trust in our legislative branch, right? And we have these internal fights, they're winning. When they mess around in our elections, that experiment is going to go down as the greatest covert action campaign in the history of Mother Russia, because we're still talking about it, we're still fighting about it. And when we're fighting about ourselves, with ourselves about this, what are we not doing? We're not talking and trying to help our friend Ukraine and pushing the Russians out of Georgia. Nobody, exactly. Out of Ukraine. Nobody knows about South Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia, and these are two places that the Russians try to influence. They don't know how they're using their energy policy, to threaten countries in their sphere of influence, right? And so that's the real goal of the Russians. And the more that we fight amongst ourselves, the better off they are. And that's why we have to do trust. Like, this issue with social media, it's real simple to me. We all were taught, don't get into a car with a stranger. Yeah. Right? Now, asterisk now, unless it's Uber or Lyft, right? Yeah. Why are people reading and sharing information on social media from people they have no clue who they are? They don't even know the identity of some of these people. Like, it's something that basic that we have to rethink and reteach our kids and teach in school on the credibility of information and how to decipher between facts and fiction.
Well, I agree with you on that, but I worry as well, and this is something that I think there's a lot, it's not a binary thing at all, but the social media companies, social media is basically the largest psychological experiment that's ever been conducted on humanity. And we didn't plan this. It's just happening right now. And the way social media companies use the defects, the weaknesses in the human mind and cognitive psychology, I worry that we may get to a point, at least some of us may get to a point, where we don't even realize we're being manipulated. Like they've become so good at the subtle manipulations that we don't even realize what's happening anymore. So, Will, I just have a few more questions for you because I know you got to go, but
yeah, I got to jump soon.
Yeah, you're not running for re-election, and is there any possible way that anybody could change your mind on that? Because Will, again, you're exactly the type of politician, of leader that this country is just starved for. And when I saw that you weren't running for re-election, I was upset. I got to be honest with you, because you're the kind of guy that I think a lot of us just look to as you're the future. You're solving real problems. You're hard to corral ideologically a lot of the time. Is there any way you would reconsider that? Or is there...
I appreciate that. I appreciate those kind words. And look, I'm not dying, right? My job, I left the CIA because I thought I could help the intelligence community a different way. I'm leaving Congress because I think I could help the country in a different way. And I'm going to continue to talk about national security and technology issues. Politically, I'm helping other candidates to make sure that they win in ways that they can be, people that I would have loved to serve with, right?
Yeah.
Doing some stuff in academia, in order to build the next cadre of tech, and policy professionals. And so I'm going to stay involved in these debates. And again, if I have the opportunity to serve my country again in the future, I'll evaluate this. I'm 42 years old. And so I'm just getting started.
You're just a young man. I'm 47. You're a young man. Well, last question for you. So one of the reasons I started this podcast is because I wanted to get some positivity out in the world during some tough times. And so I've asked all of my guests to give us in closing, give us some thoughts. And I think this is particularly important coming from one of our country's leaders, and you are one of our country's leaders. Give the listeners something positive that they can take away from this. Like, everything seems so bad right now. The election, the coronavirus, the protests, you just go on and on and on.
Well, my father taught me to always have a PMA, a positive mental attitude, right? Yep. And what has always happened in our 244 years of existence is when we've always gotten better, right? And so while we're going through these tough times, I'm not seeing a recovery. A recovery means going back to a place where we've been.
Good point.
I'm seeing an advancement, right?
Yes.
And so I'm seeing at every level of government and civic society, people are rethinking what we are doing. I also think that this process has made us realize how important human interaction is.
Yes.
And does this make us all a little bit nicer?
Yes.
Right? When we see our friends, and you want to, not having been able to hug them, I think it's going to make us remember the importance of our communities and those connections, and that people are looking at how do we become a better country and a better society, a better civilization outside once we get on the other side of this. And so while it's uncomfortable when you're going through it, I think we're going to be even stronger when we get out of it.
Amen. Well, that's a great way to end, Will. Again, thank you very, very, very much for your service to our country. Thank you for being the man you are. Thank you for being the leader you are. And man, I know we're going to hear big things from you in the future. Thanks a lot,
brother. I appreciate the time, man. You take care.
You got it, man.
You've been listening to Lessons from Leaders with Brian Beckcom. If you've enjoyed this week's interview, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and keep up with the latest episodes. You can also connect with Brian through his firm at vbattorneys.com.